It is dawn on December 22, 1944, and the fog around Bastogne has not lifted in 3 days. Inside a foxhole on the northern perimeter, a paratrooper of the 101st Airborne Division breathes into his cupped hands, watching frost form on the rim of his helmet. He has no overcoat. His unit ran out of white camouflage smocks a week ago, and most of the men around him ran out of ammunition sometime yesterday afternoon. Somewhere behind the tree line, engines are turning over, the low, grinding cough of Panzer engines warming in the cold, a sound that carries for miles across snow-covered fields when the wind is right. At the American command post in the Heinz barracks, a staff car pulls up carrying 4 German officers under a white flag. They bring a typed message demanding the town's surrender within 2 hours or face annihilation by artillery. The American acting commander, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, reads the ultimatum, laughs, and scrawls a single word on the reply that will be handed back to the German delegation. That word is nuts. What happens over the following week in the fields and farmhouses around this small Belgian crossroads town will grind down some of the finest armored formations Germany still possessed, and will do so not through overwhelming firepower, but through a stubbornness that the German High Command simply had not planned for. This is the story of how a surrounded, undersupplied American garrison broke the back of the Panzer Division sent to destroy it, and why the cost of taking Bastogne proved more ruinous to Germany than the cost of losing it ever was to the Allies. By December 1944, the German war machine was operating on borrowed time and borrowed fuel. Adolf Hitler's plan for a great counteroffensive through the Ardennes, codenamed Wacht am Rhein, depended on speed above everything else. German planners had calculated that their forces held perhaps 10 days of petrol reserves for the entire operation, after which advancing units would have to capture Allied fuel dumps or grind to a halt. The plan called for 7 road networks through the Ardennes forest to be seized quickly, and Bastogne sat directly atop the most important of them, a hub where no fewer than 7 paved roads converged, the only ground in the region capable of moving armor, artillery, and supply columns at any real pace. Without Bastogne, the German advance would be forced onto secondary tracks unsuited to tanks weighing over 40 tons, tracks that turned to mud within hours of heavy use. The German High Command expected the town to fall within a day or two of the offensive's opening on December 16th. Instead, elements of the 101st Airborne Division, rushed into the town by lorry convoy with barely any ammunition resupply and no winter clothing, dug in alongside remnants of the 10th Armored Division's Combat Command B, and refused to move. By December 20th, German forces had encircled the town completely, and the garrison found itself fighting with a shrinking stock of artillery shells, no air resupply owing to the same fog that concealed German movements, and temperatures dropping to minus 15 degrees Celsius at night. Medical supplies ran so low that captured German doctors were pressed into treating American wounded in a makeshift aid station. This was, on paper, an impossible position, a lightly armed division holding a perimeter roughly 40 kilometers in circumference against elements of 2 full German armies, expected by both sides to collapse within days. The German plan for taking Bastogne rested on armor drawn from some of the Wehrmacht's most capable panzer divisions, chiefly the 2nd Panzer Division, the Panzer Lehr Division, and later the 9th SS Panzer Division, supported by the Führer-Begleit Brigade. Panzer Lehr in particular had been formed in 1943 specifically from instructors and demonstration troops of Germany's own panzer training schools, meaning its officers and crews were, in theory, among the most technically proficient tank operators the German army fielded. Its main battle tank by December 1944 was the Panzer V, known as the Panther, a machine weighing around 45 tons and armed with a long-barreled 75mm gun capable of penetrating almost any Allied tank armor at typical combat ranges. The Panther's armor sloped at roughly 55 degrees on the front hull, a design feature that effectively doubled its resistance to incoming rounds compared to flat plate of the same thickness, rather like the way a glancing blow off a curved shield does far less damage than one landing square on a flat board. Alongside the Panthers came the heavier King Tiger, a 68-ton monster mounting an 88mm gun that could, in principle, destroy an American Sherman tank from over 2 kilometers away, well before the Sherman's own gun came anywhere near effective range. On paper, the German armored formations converging on Bastogne outclassed almost anything the Americans could put in the field. What the German plan did not fully account for was terrain, fuel, and the American defenders' willingness to use anti-tank guns, bazookas, and dug-in infantry to slow armor that had nowhere fast to maneuver. The Americans compensated for their lack of heavy armor with the M18 Hellcat tank destroyer, a lightly armored but extremely fast vehicle mounting a 76mm gun, and with towed 57mm and 105mm guns dug into farmhouse basements and hedgerows around the perimeter. Crews learned to let German tanks close to within a few hundred meters before firing at weaker side and rear armor, since a frontal shot from a 57mm gun would often simply bounce off a Panther's glacis plate, producing a shower of sparks and nothing more, not unlike a stone skipping off a pond rather than breaking through. American engineers laid mines under the cover of darkness and felled trees across the narrow country roads, funneling German armor into positions where a single well-placed anti-tank gun could halt an entire column. Artillery, though rationed, was used with unusual precision. Forward observers called down fire onto German infantry attempting to follow the tanks forward, separating armor from the foot soldiers meant to protect it from close-range attack. Production of the core American defense around Bastogne was, in truth, less about a single wonder weapon and more about a system. A network of interlocking anti-tank positions, artillery concentration, and infantry holding ground under conditions that would have broken most units, all coordinated from a command post that itself came under direct German attack more than once during the siege. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. Fighting around the perimeter was heaviest to the west and southwest of the town, at villages such as Marvy, Noville, and Champs, where American paratroopers and glider infantry, in several documented cases, held positions against German tank and infantry assaults using little more than bazookas and grenades once anti-tank guns were destroyed. At Noville, a small task force built around Sherman tanks and paratroopers held a crossroads village against Panzer Lehr elements for over a day before being ordered to withdraw, buying critical time for the main perimeter to solidify. Survivor accounts describe German tanks rolling into village streets at first light, engines idling in the fog so close that crew voices could be heard through open hatches, before American gunners opened fire at ranges under 100 meters. Records from the German side remain patchier than American ones for this stretch of the fighting, since Panzer Lehr and 2nd Panzer War diaries from the period were either lost or destroyed in the chaotic retreat that followed. So precise German tank losses at individual villages are, in many cases, estimated rather than confirmed. What is well documented is the psychological toll. German infantry accounts recovered after the war describe growing dread at approaching American positions, uncertain whether hedgerows concealed empty fields or camouflaged anti-tank guns, a hesitation that slowed the German advance even where firepower alone might have overwhelmed the defenders. Comparing the German armor thrown at Bastogne with its American counterpart makes the outcome look, on paper, like it should have gone very differently. The Sherman tank, the backbone of American armored formations, weighed around 30 tons and mounted a 75mm gun that struggled to penetrate a Panther's frontal armor even at close range, a disadvantage American crews nicknamed grimly with reference to how quickly their own tanks caught fire when hit. Yet, German numerical and technical superiority in individual tank duels mattered less than logistics. The 2nd Panzer Division, pushing past Bastogne toward the Meuse River rather than attempting to take the town directly, ran completely out of fuel near Celle by December 24th, its tanks abandoned intact and undamaged, destroyed not by American shells but by British and American aircraft once the weather cleared and the fog lifted enough for air support to operate again. This stands in sharp contrast to earlier German offensives such as the 1940 campaign in France, where panzer divisions had operated with secure supply lines and overwhelming air cover. By December 1944, the Luftwaffe could offer almost no protection, and American and British fighter bombers, once the skies cleared on December 23rd, destroyed German fuel columns and armor in the open with a thoroughness that ground combat around Bastogne itself had not managed. German commanders had gambled the entire offensive on capturing Allied fuel stocks quickly, a gamble that had worked in earlier campaigns but here proved catastrophically wrong, leaving some of the most capable tanks in the German arsenal stranded, fully armed, entirely useless. The relief of Bastogne came on December 26th, when armored columns from General George Patton's Third Army, driving north in a maneuver executed with remarkable speed given the winter conditions, broke through German lines near Assenois and re-established a corridor into the town. The siege had lasted a little over a week, a short span by the standards of most historical sieges, yet its consequences for the wider Ardennes offensive were considerable. German armored divisions that might otherwise have been driving toward Antwerp, the offensive's ultimate strategic objective, were instead bled dry attempting to reduce a stubborn garrison at a road junction, buying time for Allied reinforcements to arrive from further afield. Exact German tank losses in the Bastogne sector specifically are difficult to state with certainty, since combat records blur into broader Ardennes casualty figures and many losses came from air attack after the siege proper had ended. But historians broadly agree that Panzer Lehr and 2nd Panzer emerged from the Ardennes campaign as shadows of the formations that had entered it, their tank strength reduced by the majority in some units. The psychological impact on the German army proved arguably as significant as the material cost. The failure to take Bastogne quickly, followed by news that an American general had answered a surrender demand with open contempt, circulated through German ranks and, according to post-war interrogations of captured officers, contributed to a broader sense among German troops that the offensive's timetable, and by extension its entire premise, had already begun to unravel. Today, the story of Bastogne is preserved at the Bastogne War Museum, which stands near the site of the December fighting and displays vehicles, uniforms, and personal effects recovered from the siege, alongside a preserved Sherman tank positioned at the town's Mardassen Memorial. Surviving Panthers and King Tigers from the Ardennes campaign can be found in museum collections across Europe and the United States, including examples at the Musée des Blindés in France, though few, if any, can be traced with certainty to the specific units that fought at Bastogne itself, given how thoroughly German unit records from the retreat were lost. The town itself has grown around the crossroads that made it strategically vital, the same road junctions that drew Panzer Lehr and the 2nd Panzer Division into a fight that cost them dearly, still carrying traffic through the Ardennes today, now marked with memorials rather than minefields. What happened at Bastogne was not, in the end, a story about superior tanks, because the tanks arrayed against the American garrison were gun for gun and armor, plate for armor plate, better than almost anything the defenders could put against them. It was not a story about superior numbers, because the German formations encircling the town outnumbered the defenders for most of the siege. It was a story about a road junction that could not be given up, held by men who had run out of ammunition, run out of winter coats, and very nearly run out of options, who chose to stay anyway. The panzers that rolled toward Bastogne in December 1944 were among the finest armored vehicles Germany still had left to send. Many of them left the Ardennes as burned-out wrecks along roadsides, abandoned for want of fuel, or destroyed from the air once the weather finally broke. The town itself never fell. The offensive it was built to unlock never reached the Meuse in force, and it certainly never reached Antwerp. A single word, scrawled on a scrap of paper and handed back to a German delegation under flag of truce, has outlived every tank that rolled toward it that winter. The panzers ran out of road, out of fuel, and out of time. Bastogne, and the men who held it simply ran out of patience for the question being asked of them at all.